We were teaching English literature. That's what we were teaching, and that's what I did a PhD in. We were not teaching Manu Smriti. I don't think the English department has any business teaching it. So Premchand should be read in a Hindi department and Dickens should be read in an English department. I don't think those two should be read side by side as if they're the same thing. Premchand is not writing for the English reader, and that everything is getting better and better and we are the most liberated people that ever lived. It's not true. In the West, for instance, they don't know anything about Kashmir, but they're being misinformed, many people there. So it's like imagining that you have the truth that nobody else does, like some kinds of Christianity to imagine. And every writer is speaking to the past as well as to the present and the future. So that conversation is what I wanted to sort of communicate to students. Well, there are two things. Are you reading to read literature, or are you reading to read about women? You're doing what is called women's studies. Now, if you're reading to read, if your purpose of your course is women's studies and women's oppression, then sure, then the quality of the writing doesn't matter. Then you just read everything in every language. You don't teach prosody, you don't teach grammar, you don't teach poetics, and none of this. And all you're interested in is what is the text saying. Then there's no difference between a journalistic essay and a poem by Surdas. Readers will read what gives them pleasure, and they are continuing to read the classics. That's why the classics are still on the internet, are still selling and everything like that. So it's outside of department.
Some rebels are poets at heart, and in their rebellion, they don't scream, they don't shout, they remember. And the memories, the echoes of their memories reverberate in the works that they produce. Today we have with us, in our special edition of India Foundation, Shabda Vishwa, the world of words, a prolific writer called Ruth Vanita. In a conversation with a legend like her, we'll try to explore various thematic conversations that she has taken forward in her work, and the pioneering life she has led with respect to living rebellion in her own ways. Welcome, Ruth, and I hope that we are able to do justice to the kind of work that you have produced so far. So, Ruth, the body of work that you have produced over all these years, more than 80 journal publications, to novels, to books on poetry, a lot of translations. Your interest in looking at historical archives and looking at cultural memory to resurrect the conversation around same-sex love has been extremely interesting for us, especially at a time, and let me be very frank about my experience as a student in the Delhi University English department. I do not think it's a liberal enough space to allow all kinds of ideas to breathe. But somehow you've managed to hold your own, and you've also managed to resist the canon and resist the politics of the canon through your works. So can you please illuminate a little on that?
No, I would disagree a little bit. I think at least the English department at Delhi University at that time, which has changed a lot now, was very liberal in the classical sense of the word liberal. So the meaning of that word has also changed. So they were open to other ideas. When I published my first book, Sappho and the Virgin Mary, Same-Sex Love in the English Literary Imagination, that was published by Columbia University Press. That was in the 90s. And when I brought it back, I remember one of my professors, Professor Vinod Sena, he pinned up the cover on the notice board. He was very proud of it. So they didn't have any problem. My first essay on the topic in early 90s, 1990 or 92, was on As You Like It, on the love of Rosalind and Celia and As You Like It, and that was published in the English Department Journal here, the yearly review. So I don't think that was a problem.
I would like you to unpack a little on what you said about English departments are no longer as liberal as they used to be, because this is a concern, and a lot of papers have been written about it as well. The crisis of liberalism in the English department.
It's not just the English department, it's the humanities and the social sciences generally, who became more left-wing than liberal, I would say. And then from left-wing, they became more not just simple Marxists. We had many simple Marxists as teachers of those days, but became really what is now called woke, and maybe going to self-correct now, but I'm not sure. And there's a kind of irony to it, because when I was a kid in 2021, and I had a brief Marxist phase, and at that time the department I was in Miranda House then, was not Marxist at all, and so I was isolated there. And then later, when I, due to reading much more, left Marxism behind, then they all turned not only Marxist but Foucauldian and Derridian and critical theory and all of this stuff. So it was an interesting move. Yeah.
You co-founded India's first feminist journal, Manushi. As a gay person from the university and the surroundings, the entire ecosystem that time, to founding this magazine, was it a political statement in any way, or did you just do it because you felt there was a duty calling?
Okay, before I come to that, I remember your first question now, which was about the canon.
Yeah.
And no, actually, I am very much for the canon. When the canon here in this case being the English literary canon, but any canon, the Hindi canon, the Urdu canon, when I taught English literature, we just taught the canon, and I'm very glad that I studied at that period and I taught in that period. And I taught everything is in the canon. For instance, same-sex love is in the canon. You teach Shakespeare's sonnets, you teach E.M. Forster, you teach W.S. Auden, it's all there. It was never mentioned in class, but I taught it in that way. I taught As You Like It, for example, in that way. I mean, it's just there. It's not that I'm importing it into that. It is there. So I don't believe in discarding the canon, and that is one thing that has unfortunately happened in many English departments. They've even dumped Shakespeare. They have discarded the canon to a large extent, and imported into it everything from everywhere in the world that is not English at all. So from that, the time that trend started, I had a difference of opinion with that. As far as Manushi is concerned, well, again, we were I at least was very, very young, and so I didn't really know what I was doing, and we just wanted to bring out, we started a women's group first, and it used to meet in my hostel room in Miranda House. I was teaching then, I just started teaching at the age of 20, and we had this group meeting there. And then after several months of that group meeting, we thought we'll bring out this feminist journal, women's journal, and we started doing it. We had no idea. We thought it'll just be a thing we'll do. I thought it was just a thing I'll do on the side. And it just swallowed up my life for the next 13 years. It was, I learned a lot, but it was also a huge amount of work. And it's just like, yeah, we took over. Yeah.
Ruth, one of the reasons why I've always been fascinated by your writing and your works is this, that you say you don't resist the canon. And at the same time, the kind of ideas that you have propounded were too, for the lack of a better word, modern for all of us. And especially from, and let me speak here from the point of view where I come from. A lower middle class family girl from Bihar who was transported to Delhi to study English literature. Issues like same-sex love, for instance, issues like liberal values, for that matter, they were all very new to us. I mean, of course, now one can renegotiate one's past and see that we all have been liberal in our own ways, and Indian tradition, and you've talked about it so much in your work, that Indian tradition has been far more progressive. Indian traditional, characters have been far more progressive than the modern liberal ones, liberal within quotes. Where do you see yourself? Do you see yourself as a conservative who is trying to look into cultural archive to explain to us that this is who we've been? Or are you in exile today in the modern sense?
I don't like these labels. I don't think they work well, left, right, conservative, liberal, etc. What I'm interested in, I've always been interested in, is literary history. And literature has always surprised me. Both English literature and Hindi literature and Urdu literature has been like very joyful surprised by joy, as Wordsworth said, by discovering things that are just amazing and startling, that we tend to think that history moves in one direction and that everything is getting better and better and we are the most liberated people that ever lived. It's not true. There are things, for example, in 18th century Urdu poetry, I wrote a book called Jeddah Sex and the City about Urdu poetry at that time. So they are all Muslim poets that I studied, about six of them, who are writing about everything in life, but they're writing about love, including male-female love, female-female love, male-male love, in such an open and happy way. And they're all Muslims, but they also are quite free to criticize many things that they would not be free to criticize today. These poets could never write the way they did at that time. So history doesn't necessarily move forward, it moves in a very zigzag way. And But my work, I'm interested in always looking at the whole canon. Yes, I'm interested in poets who are forgotten or not remembered, but also ones who are very much remembered too, both of them, all of them. And to take the example of these Urdu poets, for example, everybody who had written about them had said that the poets are Insha, Rangeen and Jurrat, for instance, that they wrote about women, female love, and the critics said, oh, they are just doing this to make fun of it. So very early on in the early 80s, I had wanted to learn Urdu to read these poets, and I was told, don't bother. And so I didn't. But then later, when I did read a little for same-sex love in India, and I learned Urdu and read these poets, and then I found that the mistake was to read only what they wrote on female love. You have to read everything they wrote. That's always. So then I read everything they wrote, and I found that this wrote in the same tone, whether a funny, playful tone, whether it was male-female or female or male-male. They're sort of having fun with everything. So it's not as specifically making fun of female. They're just playful about life, about love, their ras, rang. This is what they're interested in. So then you get a whole different picture. You have to read more. You have to go beyond just a little bit of thing that you may be interested in, because that is part of a larger world. Same-sex love is not existing in its little vacuum, right? It's
Sure.
existing in the whole society. So yeah, that was what that book was about. And later I wrote the novel Memory of Light, which was about two women in a kotha in Lucknow, one of them being from Banaras, and then and their whole life, their neighbors, their friends, their servants, everyone, So yeah.
Ruth, at this point in time, I want you to talk a bit about the Dharma of justice, because there the way you converse with the characters in Mahabharat, and the way you've sort of resurrected women and male characters and female characters, and the way you've talked about different moral and ethical value systems, it has been quite an eye opener in more than one ways. One of the things which has really struck me is the simplicity with which you wrote. You're writing about extremely complex issues, and if one has to look at the teleology of the entire conversation, it's a very layered one. Of course, talk about that. Also, in the course of your conversation, please illuminate on your craft. How do you manage to layer your writing with so much of information and B, insight?
I think I learned it partly from teaching and partly from Manushi, working for my writing and Manushi, because what we tried to do was to be accessible to anyone who can read the language. We had Hindi Manushi and English Manushi, and in both cases we tried to be for everyone, not just for scholars and academics. In my academic writing, I completely avoid the jargon of critical theory, any kind of critical theory, and I write for anyone. An undergraduate should be able to read it and understand it. Otherwise, what is the point? You're writing for 3.5 people who read an academic journal. So yes, that can get you brownie points and your promotions and everything, but that doesn't reach a larger audience. So that is one thing. And then when you're teaching, the same thing. You can't teach only the two students who are extremely bright. You have to teach the whole class, right? So you have to take complex ideas and make them understandable and available to everyone, as far as is possible. It may not be completely possible, but you have to try for that, I think. And so that's how I learned to write in a simple way. As far as the Mahabharata is concerned, that's another example of discovering in the canon things I never expected to discover. I had read the Mahabharata long ago, the whole Mahabharata, for same-sex love in India. But when I reread it again now, it also depends on the reader. This is so many years later, and so I have grown. And I found in it things I never expected to find. For example, the debates on vegetarianism are so what you would expect to find in the 21st century, but they're already discussing, for example, it's not just vegetarianism, they actually discuss that should we take the milk away from the calves, the milk is meant for the calves, the cows are producing, and we're taking it away from the calves, that's not right, is that right? And then say that there are some sages who only drink the milk which comes on the foam of the cow, after the calves have drunk, which comes like foam on their face. We don't want to take the milk away from the calves. And when I translated Mahadevi Verma, she also talks about how her cow produced enough milk for the calf, and then after that there was so much extra that there was enough for her, for her family and the household as well. So That's, I didn't expect to find that. Vidura, for example, the character Vidura, I didn't realize how important this character is, and how you have so many characters who are sort of what now we call what is Avarna, and they are like Vidura, like Sanjaya, who are major teachers of Dharma. So along with the Brahmin teachers of Dharma, these people are too. Vidura is kind of the touchstone of virtue and the most virtuous character in the epic. And Sanjaya, who is the narrator of the Gita and also gets to see the Vishwarupa, and that name Sanjaya is still one of the most popular names in India. It has remained, like Arjuna, it has remained extremely popular because this character is so important. He stands as the witness, the Sakshi, to the dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna, right? So he's like the third aspect of the self, the witness. So those are just some examples, but I found the debates in the text to be very interesting, how the characters debate every possible thing, whether it's Varna, whether it's women, whether it's vegetarianism, everything is up for debate, and doesn't necessarily have to, people don't have to agree on it, they can have somewhat different opinions. So I could give many examples, but I don't know how much we want to.
Please, carry on.
For example, there's this character who is a Shudra, who's a hunter and a butcher, which would be considered a very polluted occupation. But a Brahman, a very knowledgeable Brahman, is sent to learn from him. And this guy tells him that, yes, I am a vegetarian. He chooses to be a vegetarian, but he has to practice his trade in order to support his parents. And then he gives a whole lecture on Dharma, very long lecture on Dharma, which is known as the Veda Gita, to the Brahman. And at the end, the Brahman walks around him 3 times and says, you are a Brahman right now. So you don't have to be reborn to be a Brahman, you are a Brahman right now, which means that a Brahman is being defined by his actions, because he's acting to serve his parents, and by knowledge, he has the knowledge. So that's a remarkable comment on Varna. Yeah.
The world of literature, poetry, fiction, novels, fiction in all various forms, non-fiction, but also literary and creative non-fiction. I think these are spaces where you actually feel liberated and where you can do a lot more than what very staid political narratives allow you to be. How has your relationship been with prose and poetry?
Do you mean reading them?
No,
or
reading and
them?
writing both, because you've written poems as well as a novel.
Well, the difference, I think, there is some difference. I think they activate different parts of the brain and the imagination. Prose, especially if it's non-fiction, critical writing, journalistic writing, academic writing, it's governed by thought and by logic, and you have a logical argument. And poetry works in a different way, and I write poetry in spurts. There are certain periods where I write a lot of poetry, and then I don't write, maybe even for years, and then I write again. So it's triggered by some event, some emotional event, which I write in response to that. So poetry is not something that I write at will, like I decide I'm going to sit down and write a poem. It's not like that. Whereas prose can be like that, is like that. So that's.
Would you say the same for novels?
Yeah, novels, yes, to some extent are like poetry, because again, but somewhat different, because in the case of poetry, usually it's a line that comes into my head, a line that is, if it's a powerful line, then the poem develops from that. In the case of a novel, it's not a line, it's a character or a situation or a set of characters that I start thinking about. Like, for instance, the first novel had a character called Sharad, the minor character, and in the second, he is what we would now call a gay man, so he's there. But then in the second novel, which is set in the 1920s, I was, when I was reading from the first novel, one of the members of the audience said that, what happened to Sharad, then will you write a sequel about him, like we want to know more about him. And then I just, in the 1920s, the first novel set in the 1890s, so it's a long time in between, I just gave the main character, the name Sharad. It's as if he's reborn in a different context, and what can he do in this a different world, a different context, still in India, but a different world. And so then, it developed from there, like imagining that. Yeah.
So the arc the civilizational arc that you've taken in your works by far, where do you see the question of nation fitting in? Nationalism has been a part of literary imagination for for many, many years prior to even nationalism being thought about in the way political scientists did. What is the idea of a nation for someone like Ruth Vanita?
Well, it depends on what context you're using the word, what you mean by it. So I think India is an ancient civilization and a new nation state, but it's not a new nation state in the sense of being absolutely new, like cooked up out of nothing, because there's this long civilization, there's a sense of the country which, which Diana Ek has written about, Shonalika Kaul has written about. That right in the Mahabharata itself, there's a sense of Jambudvipa. There's a very much an idea of Bharata and of its components, which is not that different from what it is today. And others who visited India, like Al-Biruni, have also written about it. They talked about the Indians and how they think their country is the best in the world and things like that. No country is like theirs and no king is like theirs and things like that. So yeah.
But do you believe that there's no country in the world like India?
See, that's a personal thing, and yes, I feel that, but I'm sure the Chinese do feel that. They call their country the Middle Kingdom because it's between heaven and earth. So maybe many countries feel that about themselves, but yes, I feel that about India. Sure.
So Ruth, when we started the conversation, we talked about your movement from Delhi to Montana. You very nonchalantly said that, well, it was because I wanted to make a life out there and have a partner, and it was difficult. But was it only that? Because I want you to unpack on this, because increasingly, and this is an oft felt view by many of us, especially somebody like me, who really feel that when we were so I'll give you examples. When we were taught English literature, for that matter, there was a criticism that we read of Manu and Manu Smriti. My point is not that we should not be critical of Manu. My point is, why did we not read Manu Smriti as a text before we approached to critically analyzing it? And this goes true for anything and everything. As you said, you have respect for the canon, you want the canon to exist, and then of course either add to it or expand on it. I specifically ask you this question because I feel deeply uncomfortable with the fact that a professor like Ruth Vanita at that point in time had to really go out and build a space somewhere else, not just academically but also personally. And has anything changed in between? Do you see India English department changing with times, or do you think it has gotten more ossified?
Well, at the time I was teaching, we were teaching English literature. That's what we were teaching, and that's what I did a PhD in. We were not teaching Manu Smriti. I don't think the English department has any business teaching it. Sorry to say that, but really, Manu Smriti should be studied in history department, political science, in Hindi and Sanskrit, whatever, not in English. I mean, we are not trained to. And when that change began to come, just when I was leaving, I had made that point very strongly in the department that we are not, who do we think we are? We are trained in English. We are not trained to teach Tamil and Sanskrit and Hindi and Japanese, and we are not. Would a Hindi department start teaching Shakespeare? No, because they don't have, I think it's extremely arrogant to think that we can teach everything in the world. And this idea comes, of course, from the West, but it has come to India that English departments should teach everything in the world. Other departments don't do that. Other language departments don't do that. But that was not the reason why I left. No, the reason I left was purely because, primarily 95%, for that reason. Otherwise, the big changes and so on came after I left.
Okay, okay. Do you feel the sacred texts in India have been negotiated enough? And do you think we have given enough respect to the thoughts there?
The ancient texts debate many ideas that we think are unique to us now, but these have been debated all along, whether it's same-sex love, whether, as I said, it's vegetarianism, whether whatever it is. Many things that we think were not debated in the past were in fact debated in the past, and those ideas were known. They're there in the Kama Sutra, they're there in Mahabharat, and so on and so forth, right? I studied Hindi I didn't do English honors. I did the BA pass, and I'm very glad I did that, because then I studied Hindi at the college level. And then in Manushi, I kept working in Hindi. So I was reading Hindi for myself, Hindi all along, whereas which I think many kids don't do. They study Hindi in school and they stop reading Hindi. So, right.
You've also worked a lot on translations. And you've translated quite a lot, and you've written on translations also a lot. Do you think translation actually and it's a very oft repeated question in literature, do you think translations really capture the essence of what the writer is trying to say?
Again, there's a difference between poetry and prose there, I think. So there's a lot that is lost in translation, but that's fine, because if you can't read the original language, then I think you want to read. I can't read Russian, so I want to read the Russian novel in English, and that's what translation is for. It's not for people who can read the original. Those who can read in Hindi should read in Hindi. Those who can't read it will have to read in English, right? So yes, a lot is lost, and both ways. If you try to translate Shakespeare to Hindi or you try to translate Tulsidas into English, both ways you will lose a lot, simply because there are all kinds of very simple phrases, not even complicated words. Complicated words are actually easier to translate. The more complex the language gets, the more you're talking about ideas, the easier it is to translate. The colloquial everyday language, like chalte chalte yun hi koi mil gaya tha, this is almost impossible to translate into English. Chalte chalte, that repetition doesn't have. We don't say walking, walking, or going along, going along. Yun hi is not a phrase that you can get in English, really. So you have to either drop it or do something as it by chance or something. It's not quite the same thing. And so also in every language has its phrases that you cannot translate. And poetry, of course, has a lot of poetry depends on the music, on the sound, and that alliteration, that assonance. You can try to get sometimes you're lucky and you can get pretty close, but much of the time you also cannot. So if you want to keep the meaning, you can't get the sound as well. So.
If one were to look at textures of language, Hindi, English, Sanskrit and Urdu, where do you find yourself more home at?
Well, English is my first language, no denying that. I grew up in a Christian family where all the members of the family, many of them from different regions. My father was Tamilian, my mother was a mix of various North Indian groups. So the common language was English. So I grew up speaking English. So English is my mother tongue. English is my first language. And then Hindi was in school, but then I kept working with Hindi at Manushi in college, etc., etc. So Hindi is the next I'm most comfortable in. Urdu is basically the same as Hindi, the same grammatical, syntactical structure, only there's much more of Persian and Arabic vocabulary in it. So then Urdu would be like a third language. Yeah.
And Sanskrit you self-taught, and of course at the
Sanskrit,
university.
I taught a course, I devised and taught a course on the Gita, and I taught it many, many times to students and also to adults. And reading the Gita in the Sanskrit and in the English, teaching it in the English, I just realized how certain things are untranslatable. The profundity of Sanskrit, not just words like Dharma, which are untranslatable, but many words like Shraddha, which most translators render it as faith. It's not faith at all. So just the sound itself, and I said poetry, the music matters. The sound itself, which English cannot reproduce. So then, that's how I feel an affinity with Sanskrit, in mantras and shlokas and the Gita and Upanishadic verses and things like that. Yeah.
The recent
The
recent essay that you wrote, and we had an exchange on that. Just want you to pause a little on how your personality has been shaped by the household that you grew up in, the household that you re-looked at and continue to re-look at, not only through your writings but also through your reflections on issues like culture, like religion, like desire. When all these questions come into play, where does your writing stay? Does it stay in exile? Does it belong somewhere, or is it becoming something? These are three words I'm obsessed with whenever I pick up any book or any essay of yours. Exile, belonging and becoming are three words that completely take me over, that overwhelm me. So can you please elaborate?
In one sense, one could say that everyone is in exile. The self is in exile in the world. When you're born into the world, we wail and cry that we are come to this great stage of fools, Shakespeare says. Or another way to put it is that you are distanced, the Atman is separated from the Paramatman, and you are in the world in a state of exile. So you're never entirely at home, even if you've never left your village. Even so, there's a sense in which you will sometimes feel like a misfit or out of place or whatever, right? And then today, of course, when you're living in, I have more than one home and you're living in more than one country, more than one city. A lot of people are doing that. And so you'll always, there's a positive way of looking at it too, which is that you're at home in more than one place. And you're always like half your heart is somewhere else. So that's sad, but also good. I mean, I don't. It just depends on how you look at it. Yeah.
And belongingness and becoming?
Becoming, of course, as the Mahabharat says, or all philosophers at one sense, or the Greek philosophers also say, everything is changing every moment. You don't, nothing, I mean, the table may look stable, but actually every cell in it is dancing and everything is changing every moment. So you are becoming all the time, though you, or unbecoming, you're losing cells and the cells are not being replaced as you grow older, right? And that process starts from birth. So you are always becoming or unbecoming at the same time, right? So that's going on. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Like Krishna says, you can't say I'm not going to act, because you are acting whether you like it or not. You're breathing, even when you're asleep, you're acting, you're dreaming, you're whatever. So there's that. And belonging, I guess, goes together with exile. And then there are moments when you, I mean, in one sense, you belong to many things, to many groups, identities, places, people, etc. And in another sense, you don't belong to anyone. You're born alone and you die alone. So, right? So both are true. And you're sort of conscious of both at the same time, right?
When you wrote The Memory of Light, I look at light, and not just I mean anybody, light will always be seen as an antonym to darkness. So when you write The Memory of Light, what are those dark aspects that you are either trying to illuminate or trying to escape from?
Well, it was about the novel is about an older woman who's looking back at her youth and the youthful love, and she's at present married to someone else, another woman. And at the time in the 18th century, they had this ritual whereby two women could marry each other. It's described by poets and in dictionaries, etc. So she's married to another woman who's her best friend, but still she has this memory of the lost love, and of course, we always idealize the lost love, as Yeats says, does the imagination dwell the most upon the woman won or woman lost? So she's remembering that lost love, and so that appears to her like an illumined space. But that doesn't I don't agree that darkness necessarily is the opposite. It doesn't mean that her present life is dark. Her present life is happy too, but a different kind of happiness. That's that ecstatic, youthful love, which is brief, and because it is brief, it's like lightning or something, right? But then there's the continuing life, and love, which is happy, but is sort of tranquil. It's not exciting and ecstatic. So these are the two types of light, if you like. Yeah.
So I think we've moved far ahead in the conversation for me to be extremely forthright on this. Ruth, I've also known you through Facebook, and we have also had exchanges where you've been deeply concerned about political happenings in the world. Somehow this conversation on your writings try to keep a very studied distance from commenting on the here and the now. And I understand that as a poet, as a writer, you're not bound to do that, because you're anyway doing that through the negotiations that you have with various themes. But say, for example, the Israel-Palestine issue today, or the recent Pakistan's attack on India today. You have a very visceral and passionate point of view when it comes to these issues. Why don't you consider writing columns or writing direct political pieces? Or
I have done a little bit of, even my poetry. I wrote a sonnet after Diwali 1984, after the 1984 massacre of the Sikhs. I wrote a sonnet on that. I wrote a sonnet on the reservation issue earlier. So I have written on political issues. And anyway, when say the killing of Sri Ramchandra Siras, when he was basically driven to death, that was that's a political issue too. Or I write about same-sex marriage. I have a book on same-sex marriage. That's very much a political issue. So it depends what you're thinking of as political. I've just started writing a blog in which I wrote about both the issues you mentioned. And I don't know I suppose it's passionate, but my writing on such issues is about facts. I'm interested in facts and the truth, in the sense of there's the truth which is beyond fact, but there's also the truth of facts. And I'm really astonished at the amount of misinformation and the number of lies and the sheer ignorance of many people whom the media is many parts of the media are misinforming about issues like this. And in the West, for instance, they don't know anything about Kashmir, but they're being misinformed, many people there. So I think it's important to present the facts. And not to select them in a way that is distorting. So that's, yeah.
As an Indian, when you look at the Western press, especially the one in the US, and when you look at the coverage of India, what's the immediate thought that comes to your head? Not just with respect to what's being written, but also the entire architecture that goes behind it, the team of editors, the journalists who sort of feed this information, our embassies who are equally responsible for that, to and fro of information. What do you feel as an Indian?
I think you have to seek, it's not just the Western press, the Indian press as much. You have to seek out information. And we are lucky now that we have things like YouTube and we have social media and so on. And so we have to, I think you have to seek, if you discover that something is being not fully represented or facts are being missed out, you have to seek out the facts. You have to seek out all the facts and the truth. Or if the facts are there, but they're being buried somewhere on page 4 or 5 or whatever, or being just briefly mentioned and then not explored, then you have to, with the internet, we're very lucky to have the internet, so we have to, and the internet also has a lot of misinformation, so we have to know how to weigh and assess and seek it out. It's not easy, and that's a process which takes time to learn which source you can trust and which source, and maybe look at sources from opposite sides of the spectrum and then to understand the situation. And I think a lot of people just read only one kind of source, and so if you read only one kind of source for years and years and years, read or watch or listen or whatever, then you are so convinced of just one story. It's like imagining that you have the truth and nobody else does, like some kinds of Christianity to imagine. So then you're happy in this little world of yours, and if you only have friends who only say the same things that you are used to hearing, then you may very well then on many things be missing, not seeing. Maybe it's happy. It's better to be ignorant and happy. Maybe it's fine, because when you know more, then maybe you're unhappy. I don't know. But if you want truth, as Socrates says, then you have to look for it. And if that matters, then you have to put effort into it. And even if it makes you unhappy, yeah.
That's a great thought. One of the questions which I've always wanted to ask you is, when you take up an issue and you want to write on it, what's the process? I asked this question because before coming for this conversation, I had a small talk with a group of youngsters in their early and late teens who are drawn to the creative arts and who either want to make films in future or are invested in music. They wanted me to specifically talk to you about the craft of writing. How does one go about creating, in their words, masterpieces?
My works are not masterpieces, but it depends on the genre. If poetry and prose, I think, are different, fiction and non-fiction are also different. If we're talking about non-fiction, I think editing is absolutely crucial, editing your own work. And I always tell my students this, to write even an essay. You write it ahead of time, set it aside and read it again after as long a time as you can afford, 10 days, 1 month, 1 year even sometimes. You reread what you've written, and then you read it as if you're reading someone else's writing, and then you see where it could be improved in terms of organization, moving paragraphs around, which is so easy to do now on the computer. But earlier at Manushi, we used to be literally cutting and pasting. Yeah. People don't realize what that means. You'd actually cut the paper and stick it with Scotch tape too. Wow. That's where the word cut and paste comes from. And so when you so I think that's crucial, revising, trying to read with a critical eye your own writing, and reading it after some time definitely makes a difference, because when you've just written it, you're so attached to it, you need some distance from it. Using as few words as possible to say what needs to be said. Brevity is the soul of wit, that's true. Cut out all extra words, everything that can be cut out. Say it in as few words as possible to make it clear. Clarity is the main point, the main thing you want. You want to be able to communicate, and to communicate you want clarity. Not just flowery words and adding sentences and words for their own sake to think that will make it look very high flown. No, keep it simple and clear. So those are some ideas.
You've looked at the issue of same-sex love and desire, also in a very architectural way. Can you please talk about the grammar of same-sex love and desire in Indian writings? Can it be used as grammar in the very first place?
Well, I started off when Salim Kidwan and I edited Same-Sex Love in India, we started off knowing almost nothing. And so I started off by reading everything I possibly could, like from both the epics to the Purans to the Kama Sutra to later versions of the epics and so on, and discovered a lot of things. And then, so there's the discovery process, and then there's the editing process, because we had to select. And to some extent, that is a matter of interpretation. How do you interpret what is happening in the text? And sometimes my interpretations change over time. Like my initial, at that time in the year 2000 that book was published, my view of Shikhandini's story has changed. And now in my latest book, Dharma of Justice, I take a very different view, a rather different view of him or her, Shikhandini, who becomes Shikhandin. So there's that. I see same-sex desire as part of a spectrum. I agree with Kinsey that it's not, these are not fixed categories. They can change. People change over time. And, you know, some people are more, say 90% inclined to same-sex desire, some are 50%, those who are called bisexual, some may be, you know, so this varies person to person. And it can also change in a person, you know, people who thought they were what is called gay can change and become heterosexual, the other way around. So some people quite late in life even. But so yes, but just being open, and I think Indian culture is open to the Indian literature and has been open to the idea of variety and of a range of feelings and ideas about everything, not just desire and sexuality, but everything. You know, what people are inclined to, inclinations, predilections. And these are what I find in my book, Love's Right, which is about same-sex marriage, and my next book, which is on rebirth, the idea of rebirth. I find perhaps somewhat unique to in the Indian understanding of desire and predilections and so on, is the whole idea of rebirth, because that is the explanation given in the ancient texts and even in the modern ones. All these low-income young women, non-English speaking young women who got married who are reported as having got married or committed joint suicide from 1980 to the present. So many of them, as well as the priests who conducted the marriages, said that they must have been attached in a former birth. And that's the same explanation given in the 11th century Katha Sarit Sagara and other such texts, that attachments or aversions of any kind come from a former birth. And I find that a very attractive idea, and also an idea that enables socially disapproved relationships of any kind, and this applies to cross jati, cross varna, cross class, many kinds of relationships. They are often explained in India as by saying that if they are so attached to each other despite all the obstacles, then that must be because of, whether as friends or as lovers or whatever, because of attachments in a former birth. And you know, love at first sight or hatred at first sight is inexplicable in a way. True. And all societies have tried to come up with their theories, and this is one of the theories, which I find quite a convincing theory. Of course, one can't prove any of these things,
sure.
But yeah.
Sure. Ruth, if you were to head the English department worldwide, what would idea. Worldwide, not just India. What are some of the changes that you would want to bring?
No, I don't want to head. I was the head of various departments, and it was an awful job. So I don't want to do that. But in my own teaching, what I did was, as I said, when in America you can design your own courses. Sure. So some courses were designed, and we always had some freedom to design. So in designing my own courses, I would sometimes, like I taught a course on fathers and daughters in the Western literary tradition. So starting with the Greeks and coming down to the present. It's a set of texts on different kind of relationships, father-daughter relationships. So I would take a theme sometimes. This is one way of designing, take a theme and then look at it over time. I'm interested in history, literary history, and how we inherit what we inherit from our ancestors, not our biological ancestors alone, but our literary ancestors. And every writer is speaking to the past as well as to the present and the future. So that conversation is what I wanted to sort of communicate to students. So that, and then I taught a course on same-sex love in India and in the West, comparative, and showing, again, starting in the ancient world with the Greeks and the Sanskrit and coming down to the present. So that was another course. So then I've also taught courses just on one author, one text, or like on the Gita, or just on Shakespeare, or whatever. So that sort of thing. So, but what I did try to teach a course on I found that if you put into the title same-sex love, then you only get one kind of student, the kind of student who's interested in that. Whereas if you don't, and I think a much better approach for me than I discovered by experiment is to just teach the regular, teach literature, teach romantic literature, teach Shakespeare, teach whatever, teach Indian writing, whatever, teach anything. And in it, you will find everything. So whatever you want, whether you want to focus on gender, on sexuality, or on whatever it is you want to focus on, you will find it in that itself, and then you'll be teaching all the students because everyone will come, and that's, I think, more worthwhile. Yeah.
When you look at the kind of translations that are happening in India, regional languages being translated into English. Now, I'm not talking about Hindi at the moment. Where do you see room for improvement? Do you see the courses at various departments changing with times? Do you think they should change?
Well, I think the quality of translation has improved a lot, and I see the purpose of translation as for people to be able to read literature in other languages that they don't know the original, right? As far as studying in translation, I'm not so fond of that. I'm very fond of I very much believe in reading the literature of other languages. Studying is a whole different thing. I was not in favor of studying translated texts along with original English texts in English. For example, so for instance, you're reading, let's say, Charles Dickens, and then you're reading Premchand in translation. It will never measure up because you can't get Premchand's language in English, simple. And Charles Dickens's language, it's his language. So he will always, in English, read better than Premchand. So you're putting the translated text at a real disadvantage, and I think that's a big mistake. So Premchand should be read in a Hindi department and Dickens should be read in an English department. I don't think those two should be read side by side as if they're the same thing. Premchand is not writing for the English reader. So Premchand, the English reader should read Premchand for fun and for pleasure, but not as an object of study, because when you're studying also not just what Premchand is writing about, you are studying the language, the brilliance of the language, and that you can't get in translation. It's lost. Yeah.
Sure, I agree with you. But one of my fondest memories of the English department has actually been reading various kinds of translated work from Tamil, Silapatikaram from Tamil Nadu, or Oriya poets or Gujarati poets for that matter. And the thematic arc, say for example, if one has to look at the woman question and various kinds of oppression that women go through, which has been one of the major thematic obsessions with our department that time. I don't know if it has changed today. It really made sense to read all of this and also read side by side, also read the 19th century novel and sort of draw similarities and draw parallels. In my case, it really enriched my
Well, there are two
readings.
things. Are you reading to read literature, or are you reading to read about women? You're doing what is called women's studies. Now, if you're reading to read, if your purpose of your course is women's studies and women's oppression, then sure, then the quality of the writing doesn't matter. Then you just read everything in every language. If you're reading from the point of view of literature to understand how literature works, then the language matters a lot. So it depends what you're trying to do. Or you call it world literature. If you're going to call it English, then you're reading in English and you're also reading a translation from Tamil. The translation from Tamil cannot bring the richness of Tamil out at all. It's not possible for translation to do that. It cannot measure up to Jane Austen or Charles Dickens. It just can't because of your translation. You're reading the translator, you're not reading the original. So then you should call it world literature. If there's a program called world literature and there you read everything, then that's fine. Everything is translated then. Almost everything is translated, and you know that that's what you're doing, right? So that's my point is, what is the purpose? What are you trying to do? And I agree that nowadays English departments are mostly not about aesthetics. They're not about literature or aesthetics. Most students are scared of poetry, and they are not, because they haven't been taught poetry properly. So they're not interested in the sound, in this craft of the poet, in any of that. They're just interested in what is the poet saying. Do I agree with what the poet is saying? Is it politically correct? If not, I'm not interested in this, then it's bad.
Sure.
So I'm just trying to slot it in a category. Is it good because it's against oppression or something, or is it bad poetry because it seems to be saying things that I don't agree with? So then you're not looking at it as a poem at all. So then that's fine. If that's the purpose, if the course is about women's studies or oppression studies or whatever it is, then sure, it absolutely doesn't matter. And perhaps English has become that now. English departments have
unfortunately-
largely become that. So yes, so the craft doesn't matter, then it doesn't matter.
But
Yeah.
unfortunately, this is a conversation that we do not have. And it's only later in life that one comes to a reckoning. And then you feel that perhaps...
Well, I'm glad I was educated at a time when it did matter, when we were alive to, the teachers at least were trying to make alive to the beauty of the language, whether it was English or Hindi or whatever it was, the beauty, the resonance of the language. Every language has what Hindi calls dhwani, the resonance, right? The word may be the same, rang and color are the same, that's the translation, but rang has meanings that color does not, right?
Sure.
Rasa cannot really be translated into English, but if you're going to translate it as juice or whatever, rasa has meanings that juice or essence doesn't. Right? So an essence has meanings that rasa doesn't. You can't put these on the same. So, but if you do, as I said, since now it has largely, English departments, not entirely, but largely English departments have become not about aesthetics. They don't teach how rhyme works, how rhythm works. In fact, you don't even read poetry with rhyme or rhythm. You don't teach prosody, you don't teach grammar, you don't teach poetics, and none of this. And all you're interested in is what is the text saying. Then there's no difference between a journalistic essay and a poem by Surdas. There's no difference. Is Surdas saying something I agree with and I approve of? Is he saying something that is anti-caste or anti-whatever, then I approve of it? And the journalistic essay is also saying that I approve of it. There's no difference between the two. But Surdas is Surdas for a reason. He's not a journalist. That's what I'm saying.
Ruth, before we end this conversation, what are some of those messages, or what is that advice which you would want to give to this generation, this new generation, which is also, by the way, growing up in an age of AI, where poetry can be written by, at the back end by some, artificial genius. So how genius the poetry would be, that's another question altogether. But what suggestion would you have, keeping in mind that departments are going to remain the same? I'm sorry, I have a very bleak kind of an outlook on that, since conversations like these do not happen as to why are we reading a text and why are we studying literature in the very first place. And let's assume that the core structure is going to remain the way it is. What are those tips that you would want to give to youngsters today to approach literature and to remain true to
I
themselves?
think a young colleague of mine, somebody who's teaching at Delhi University College, I won't name, I was having a conversation about poetry in a bookstore, and the interlocutor said, who reads now the classics, Wordsworth or Keats or something? Nobody reads that. And all we want to, she was asking me, why is your poetry so non-political, and why are you not talking about the political issues? And she was asking these questions, and then I mentioned somebody like Wordsworth, like Keats, and I said, you can't expect every poet to write about politics. Keats didn't write about politics. And she said, but who reads that? Later, this young woman who teaches at Delhi University said to me in the bookstore that look at the shelves. And she was quite right that they have the shelves of the classics, Wordsworth, Keats, everybody is there. All those writers are there. Why are they there? The bookstore would keep them if they were not selling. So those are still very much being read. Even on the internet, they are being read. There are many websites where you can read all of these writers. So I think people, as Virginia Woolf said, you trust the reader, the common reader. You trust the sense of the common reader. The common reader knows what is good and what is pleasurable. After all, literature is pointless if it doesn't give you pleasure. And that's the purpose of literature. And readers will still read Jane Austen and Premchand and all of these writers. They won't read just those who are saying what is, who are saying what is supposed to be the correct thing to say. Readers will read what gives them pleasure, and they are continuing to read the classics. That's why the classics are still on the internet, are still selling and everything like that. So it's outside of departments. In fact, many students would say to me that they came to English because they enjoy reading, but that the coursework basically killed the enjoyment of reading. So reading is much beyond, and the pleasure of reading is much beyond the classroom. We read most of the a lot of pleasurable reading I did for class as well, but a lot of it beyond as well, most of it beyond. So I think it's, that will continue, and that is fine. Yeah.
Thank you, Ruth. Thank you for agreeing to do this with me. And
Sure.
I'm glad that we had this conversation. I hope you enjoyed the session.
Yeah,
And
sure.
I hope that
Thank
you not only get enriched from this, but do pick up Ruth's works. She's written more than 80 journal articles, 2 novels which are extremely important if you want to navigate through her mind, and 2 poetry collections hers, lot of volumes of edited work. Please pick up the work. Also, she's on Substack, so do subscribe to her newsletters. They're quite provocative, evocative, and extremely engaging essays. Keep in touch, and please suggest who you would want to see on the next conversation. Thank you.